The microphone cracked, and the sound jolted the room into silence. 200 employees froze in their seats. The words hung heavy in the air, echoing across polished floors and steel beams. My pulse hammered. I stood there, every eye on me, humiliation cutting deeper than any blade. "Effective immediately," Brandon Mercer declared, his voice amplified through the glass-walled auditorium. "You are finished here, Raven Cross." I wasn't just another manager they could toss aside. For 19 years, I had been the architect of Stratacor's lifeline, the system that moved contracts, secured patents, and kept billions flowing across borders. I wrote its first lines of code when the company was still in a cramped warehouse. I kept it alive through mergers, crises, and sleepless nights. Even last month, I worked from a hospital corridor, laptop balanced on my knees. While my mother fought through another round of heart treatment, I gave this company everything: my skill, my health, my time. And yet, here I was, discarded like I had never mattered. Brandon smirked, savoring the performance. He was the CEO's son, the heir who never built anything, who wore tailored suits and treated meetings like theater. Where I was quiet, he was loud. Where I carried responsibility, he carried entitlement. His presence at Stratacor was a birthright, not an achievement. "Escort her out," he snapped at security. His confidence wasn't rooted in competence, but in the Mercer name stamped on the glass above us. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. I was the one who kept the engine running. He was the prince posing with the keys to a kingdom he didn't understand. And now he believed that humiliating me in front of every colleague would prove his control. But as I turned toward the gleaming glass doors, I saw faces shift, some shocked, some quietly sympathetic, a few almost afraid. They didn't know what Brandon had just unleashed, and he certainly didn't either. The humiliation burned, yes. But beneath it, something colder stirred. They thought firing me was the end. In reality, it was the beginning. The sting of Brandon's words still echoed as I walked toward the glass doors. But humiliation wasn't the whole story. Beneath it, a deeper truth pulsed steady and unshaken. I was Raven Cross. For 19 years. I had built the system that kept Stratacor alive. I remembered the beginning, a dimly lit warehouse, 24 employees huddled around rickety desks. The company was nothing then, just ambition stitched together with secondhand servers. While others pitched ideas to investors, I stayed behind to write code through the night, line by line, function by function. I shaped the architecture no one else understood. Contracts that once took weeks to process moved in minutes. Payments that used to clog international wires slid through like water. My fingerprints weren't just on the system, they were its pulse. Through mergers, audits, and global expansions, I was the one called when deals threatened to fall apart. My phone would ring at 3 a.m, and I'd answer without hesitation. The work followed me everywhere, into airports, hotel lobbies, even the sterile air of hospital corridors. I could still picture myself last winter, crouched beside my mother's hospital bed, laptop perched on my knees while machines beeped around us. She squeezed my hand between treatments and whispered, "You're stronger than you think." I told her I had no choice. The irony was sharp. I gave this company my strength, my health, even moments I should have saved for my family. Yet all Brandon saw was a disposable employee he could dismiss like flipping a switch. The truth he didn't know, though, was that the system I built didn't run on passwords or ID cards. It ran on something deeper, patterns tied to me alone, my voice, my rhythm, the way I authenticated commands. Without me, it wasn't just vulnerable, it was incomplete. Brandon once begged me for access. I remembered his smirk when he slipped into my office, lowering his voice like we were co-conspirators. "Come on, Raven, show me how you do it. Dad needs me ready." I shook my head. "This system isn't a toy. It isn't for you." The rejection stung him more than I realized. From that moment, his resentment sharpened into obsession. Now he stood on stage, basking in what he thought was victory. But victories built on arrogance collapse fast. I knew because I had written the system myself. It wasn't designed to flatter princes. It was designed to protect the blood that built it. As the glass doors neared, I inhaled slowly, steadying myself. The humiliation would linger, but so would the quiet pride of knowing the truth. I wasn't just walking away empty-handed. I was walking away carrying the one thing they could never replace, and it was about to remind them exactly who I was. Brandon Mercer strutted across the stage like he had conquered something. The smirk on his face was more than arrogance. It was entitlement carved into his bones. He believed firing me proved his dominance, that humiliating me was a coronation of sorts. But the room saw something different. They saw a spoiled heir playing king for years. I'd watched him drift through Stratocor's halls in tailored jackets, barking orders he didn't understand. He showed up late to strategy sessions, laughed at technical briefings he couldn't follow, and spent more time on champagne dinners than inside the data center. Yet promotions fell into his lap like gravity itself, bent to the Mercier name. Where I gave knights and health, he gave handshakes and borrowed charm. The resentment grew quietly in me, but I buried it under work. Until moments like these reminded me just how sharp the divide was. Brandon didn't hate me because I failed. He hated me because I succeeded where he couldn't. My competence was a mirror reflecting his inadequacy. I remembered one board meeting when $1 billion contract hung in the balance. Brandon swaggered in, late and unprepared, trying to impress the client with jokes. It nearly tanked the deal. Only after hours of recalculations and a midnight presentation I crafted from scratch did the client sign. The board applauded Brandon. He winked at me afterward like it was a shared secret. I walked out without responding. And yet, despite all his failures, the company whispered, "Brandon is the heir. Brandon is the future." I heard the whispers too. But deeper down, I also heard the truth employees dared only murmur over coffee. "Raven keeps us alive. She's the real pulse." That was the irony Brandon could never accept. He wanted my obedience. But more than that, he wanted my absence. Without me, he believed he could finally shine. His problem was, he mistook my silence for weakness. Now, standing in the auditorium, his smirk widened as he scanned the employees, daring them to object. None did. They didn't cheer either. The silence that followed his proclamation wasn't approval, it was dread. He didn't notice. Princes never do. As I neared the glass doors, my humiliation slowly shifted to something heavier, a quiet storm of resentment. He thought this was over, but I knew what waited in the shadows of his arrogance. Systems are merciless. They don't bend to charm or inheritance. They respond only to the blood that built them. And Brandon Mercer had just severed his own lifeline. I hadn't even reached the glass doors when the first sound of trouble broke the silence. A sharp gasp cut across the auditorium. Heads turned toward the wall of monitors that tracked Stratocor's live transactions. At first, it was just a flicker, one frozen contract file caught mid-transfer, then another, then 10. The whisper of confusion spread like static. Brandon, still basking in his little triumph, didn't notice. He was busy straightening his suit jacket, smirking as if firing me had crowned him king. "This company," he boasted, voice carrying like a cheap actor on stage, "will move forward without dead weight." The irony landed almost instantly. "Sir, something's wrong," a technician said, his voice trembling as he pointed toward the screen. Every eye shifted. Error messages began to bloom in red across the dashboards. Transaction failed. Authorization denied. Process halted. Lines of code that had always flowed clean and precise now jammed like a clogged artery. Brandon waved dismissively. "It's a glitch. Restart the modules. Handle it." Technicians scrambled forward, fingers flying across keyboards. The screens went dark for a moment. Rebooting. Relief rippled through the room. Like maybe this was just another hiccup, the kind we'd all seen 100 times before. Then the monitors flared back to life. Contracts resuming, payments pushing through. "See?" Brandon crowed, spreading his arms like a showman. "Handled. That's what leadership looks like." But arrogance has a short half-life. Barely 10 seconds later, every screen bled red again. Only this time. The error was new. Bold letters stamped across the system. Original key missing. The room went still. The air grew heavy. This wasn't just a glitch, it was rejection. Technicians typed frantically, trying alternate passwords, fingerprints, security tokens. Each attempt was spat back with the same message. Original key missing. I stopped just short of the glass doors, spine straightening as I turned slightly. My humiliation still burned, but now it mingled with something else. A cold certainty. The system was doing exactly what it was designed to do. Brandon's smile faltered. He barked again, louder this time. "Fix it!" "I'm trying, sir," one technician stammered, sweat shining on his forehead. "It isn't responding to anyone. It's like—" He hesitated, glancing nervously around. "Like it's waiting for her." Whispers surged through the employees, rippling like a tide. Fear, disbelief, awe, and somewhere in that sea of murmurs, I caught a phrase whispered by a junior engineer who had worked under me for years. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "I've never seen that code before." A shiver ran through the room. Brandon's smirk had collapsed into a scowl, his face reddening as the monitors screamed in defiance. The system wasn't broken. It was alive, and it had just reminded them all whose pulse kept it breathing. And the worst part for Brandon? This was only the beginning. The silence didn't last long. It shattered into pure noise. The moment the words, "original key missing," flashed across every screen. The auditorium erupted. Phones buzzed in frantic succession. Executives barked into headsets, and 200 employees drowned in a storm of confusion. The hum of quiet professionalism that had always defined Stratocor's halls was gone, replaced by fear, disbelief, and the kind of chaos that spreads like fire in dry grass. "Restart again!" Brandon shouted, his voice cracking. His earlier smugness had evaporated, leaving only a man flailing in the spotlight. He slammed his palm against the nearest console. "Do it now!" Technicians obeyed, fingers flying, rebooting servers and refreshing code. But no matter what command they entered, the system responded with the same unyielding message. Original key missing. Every denial was like a hammer against the thin glass of Stratocor's facade. Across the room, executives stared at their tablets, their screens lighting up with angry calls. One voice was accidentally patched through to the loudspeaker, filling the space with fury. "If your system isn't restored in 5 minutes, we're invoking penalty clauses. Do you hear me? 5 minutes!" The words landed like a slap. Millions were on the line, every 60 seconds ticking away like a guillotine's drop. Brandon's face burned red. "It's her!" he roared, pointing toward the doors where I stood frozen between staying and leaving. "She's behind this! She sabotaged us!" But the employees didn't turn to me. Their eyes stayed on him, wide, wary, disbelieving. They knew me. They knew the years I had carried this system. The weight of deals balanced on code I alone had crafted. Sabotage didn't look like me. Sabotage looked like arrogance finally meeting consequence. The noise grew unbearable. Executives clutched their phones. Lawyers shouted legal jargon. Managers argued over protocols. And engineers muttered helplessly as their screens bled red. The chaos didn't just live in the air, it infected the people, making every voice sharper, every movement more desperate. And through the frenzy, I felt something shift inside me. Only minutes earlier, humiliation had seared my chest. Now, watching Brandon stumble and scream, watching the company unravel before my eyes. That shame cooled into something steadier. Vindication. The system was telling the truth I had carried alone for years. They could not function without me. Then came the sound that cut through everything, the slam of heavy footsteps echoing down the corridor. A murmur swept the crowd. Heads turned. The air changed. The doors burst open, and Richard Mercer stormed in. Richard Mercer's entrance cracked the room like a lightning bolt. He strode forward, silver hair slicked back, his tailored suit immaculate, but the calm authority he once commanded was gone. His face was pale, lips pressed into a hard line, eyes darting across the screens blazing red with warnings. "What the hell is happening here?" he thundered. The room fell into a stunned hush. For a moment, it was only the alarm pings echoing through the auditorium. Then, all eyes shifted to Brandon, the heir who had just paraded his authority minutes before. Brandon's jaw tightened, his voice breaking as he pointed in my direction. "It's her, Dad! Raven sabotaged the system. She's the one behind this." I felt the heat of 200 pairs of eyes brush against me, but no one spoke. I stood quietly near the glass doors, hands steady at my sides. I didn't need to defend myself. The system was already doing that for me. Richard's stare cut through the silence, first at his son, then at me. His voice lowered, sharp as a blade. "You fired her?" Brandon swallowed. "Yes. She was dead weight. You idiot." The words slipped from Richard's mouth before he could stop them. For the first time in years, the mask of control cracked. The room erupted again. Executives yelling into phones, investors demanding answers, lawyers reminding Richard of penalty clauses. Each passing minute cost the company another $250,000. And still, the system refused every command. Richard raked his hands through his hair, then looked straight at me. His voice, once commanding, dropped into something desperate. "Raven, unlock it, please." I blinked, stunned by the word, "please." This was the same man who had treated me like a ghost in my own company. For nearly 2 decades, he'd walked past me in corridors without a word, handed my credit to others in board meetings, and let his son humiliate me in public. And now, in front of 200 witnesses, Richard Mercer was pleading. I thought of my mother lying in a hospital bed, heart monitors clicking beside her, of the bills stacked on my kitchen counter, reminders of the life I had sacrificed piece by piece to keep this company alive. I thought of the nights I coded until my vision blurred, of the promotions passed over, of the silence I had endured. And then, I thought of the smirk on Brandon's face as he declared me finished. "I thought," I said slowly, my voice carrying across the room, "that I didn't belong here anymore." Richard flinched. "Name your price, whatever it takes." The desperation in his voice rippled through the employees. They glanced between him, his son, and me. The Mercer name no longer carried invincibility. It carried shame. Behind him, Brandon hissed, his face red. "Don't beg her, she's nothing without us." But the room didn't believe him anymore. And Richard knew it. For the first time in Stratacor's history, the Empire bent not to the Mercers, but to me. Brandon shoved past the cluster of technicians, his face crimson with anger and embarrassment. "Move!" he barked, nearly knocking over a junior engineer. "I'll show you how it's done." His hands shook as he positioned himself at the central terminal, but he forced a smirk, glancing around the room as though the entire debacle had just been a warm-up act for his brilliance. He pressed his thumb to the biometric scanner. The machine beeped, a sterile, mechanical sound that seemed to hold the whole auditorium in suspense. Then, in bold green letters, the screen displayed, "Access granted." A collective gasp spread through the room. Relief washed over a few faces. Brandon straightened his shoulders, grin stretching ear to ear. "See?" he crowed. lifting his arms as though he'd just won a championship. "I told you I had control. I told you this company doesn't need her." For one fleeting moment, he basked in applause that never came. Employees shifted uneasily, glancing at one another, unsure whether to celebrate or wait. Brandon didn't notice their hesitation. He was already reaching for the next command, convinced he had proven his worth. But then it happened. The screen flickered. The green letters dissolved into red, sharper and louder than before, across every monitor in the auditorium. The words blazed. "Primary authorization required." Gasps turned into murmurs. Fingers froze above keyboards. Brandon's grin collapsed in real time, melting into disbelief. "No, no, that's not right," he shouted, jabbing commands into the console. "It said access granted. It said it." The system didn't care, one by one. Partially opened modules slammed shut. Contract files vanished into encrypted vaults. Transactions reversed completely. The entire network locked itself tighter than ever. The sound of doors sealing echoed through every blinking server, as though the system itself was laughing at him. "No, no, no!" Brandon's voice cracked as he pounded the keyboard. "I'm the authorized user. I'm the key." A low chuckle broke the tension. It came from one of the engineers standing off to the side. He shook his head and muttered just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "The backup is nothing without the original." The words spread like wildfire, first in whispers, then in louder echoes, repeated by lips across the room. Employees smirked, some even laughing under their breath. The phrase rolled through the crowd, swelling into a verdict. Brandon was a fraud. Richard's head dropped into his hands. The CEO who once commanded markets now sat powerless, watching his son crumble. The humiliation was no longer mine to carry, it was theirs. And as the words circled the room, I felt something in me shift. For years, I had endured in silence, invisible behind the empire I built. But now, before 200 witnesses, the truth was undeniable. From that moment, it wasn't just my revenge, it became their public humiliation. The financial dashboard flickered onto the auditorium's largest screen, and with it came the number that made the entire room go still: $250,000 per minute. Every 60 seconds, $250,000 evaporated into penalties, reversed transactions, and broken trust. The numbers spun faster than eyes could track, like a slot machine that only paid out in losses. By the time the first 5 minutes had passed, more than $1 million was gone. The room felt smaller, suffocating, as if everyone was breathing the same recycled air of panic. Richard Mercer lunged for his phone, his voice sharp as he barked at a banker. "Release the reserves! Cover the penalties before they spiral!" He waited, listening, then cursed loudly. "What do you mean you can't authorize without system clearance? This is my company!" Another call. A law firm this time. His tone shifted from anger to desperation. "You can block the penalty clauses, right? Delay them at least?" His face fell as the voice on the other end responded. "No. No. Listen to me. Don't walk away now." He slammed the phone down, his composure bleeding out just as fast as the money. Brandon slumped into a chair, his earlier bravado gone. His expensive suit was darkened with sweat under the arms and across his back. He clutched his head with both hands, rocking slightly, as if motion alone could undo the disaster. His eyes darted around the room, searching for someone to blame, but every glance that met his was cold, distant, and unsympathetic. Meanwhile, I stood motionless near the doors, calm as glass. Inside me, the humiliation I had felt earlier had been replaced by something steady, almost surgical. This wasn't anger anymore, it was clarity. The empire that had dismissed me as invisible was bleeding out in front of me, and I hadn't lifted a finger. The system was merely doing what it was designed to do, refusing anyone who wasn't me. Phones kept ringing, voices overlapping into a cacophony of despair. Executives begged partners for extensions. Managers whispered frantically, calculating how much time they had before the losses tipped from devastating into unrecoverable. Fear pressed on the crowd like gravity. Then, amid the chaos, my phone buzzed softly in my pocket. I slipped it out and glanced down. A message from a former colleague, one of the engineers I had mentored years ago. "We're all rooting for you." My throat tightened. I looked back at the room, at the nervous glances, the small nods, the subtle smirks as Brandon squirmed. They hadn't abandoned me. Quietly, silently, they were with me. Richard's voice cracked across the auditorium. "Fix it! Do something! We're losing millions!" His words carried no weight now. They sounded like the shouts of a man shouting at a collapsing dam with bare hands. The number on the screen kept climbing. 5 million. 10. The empire was unraveling by the minute. And then, with millions already gone, Richard tried one last thing, begging. The chaos had hollowed Richard Mercer. The man who once dominated boardrooms and commanded markets now looked like a relic collapsing under his own empire's weight. His tie hung loose, his shoulders sagged, and his voice cracked as he stumbled toward me. "Raven," he said, his tone stripped of arrogance, heavy with desperation. His eyes darted around the room, as if searching for dignity, but finding none. Then, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, he gave up the last thing he had left: pride. "Name your price." The words echoed through the silent auditorium. For a heartbeat. No one moved. 200 employees stood frozen, their leader's downfall unfolding in front of them. The great CEO, nearly on his knees, begging the woman they had discarded. I didn't move either. I met his eyes with steady calm. No triumph, no cruelty, just truth. "When I built this heart," I said softly, my voice carrying farther than I intended. "Did you ever think I would stay invisible forever?" The question struck deeper than a demand ever could. Richard's lips parted, but no answer came. He knew the truth, and so did everyone else. For nearly 2 decades, I had been the unseen architect of their survival. While the Mercers treated me like a shadow, now the shadow was the only light left. Then, something unexpected broke the silence. A technician, young, nervous, rose from his chair and began to clap. Slowly, deliberately. The sound echoed sharp against the glass walls. Another joined, then another. Soon, a wave of applause rolled across the auditorium, gathering strength until it became a storm. The clapping wasn't for Richard. It wasn't for Brandon. It was for me. Richard's face crumpled. Brandon, shaking with rage, leapt from his chair. "Stop it! This is my company!" His voice cracked, raw and desperate, but the words only fueled the laughter that followed. Bitter, sharp, contagious. Employees who had once smiled politely at his arrogance now laughed openly at his downfall. "This is my company!" he shouted again, his fists trembling at his sides. The louder he screamed, the harder they laughed. The heir had been exposed, not as a leader, but as a boy pretending to wear his father's crown. I stood quietly through it all, my hands folded, my breathing steady. I didn't demand money. I didn't demand power. I didn't need to. Their collapse was happening without me lifting a finger. The empire they had stolen from me was devouring itself. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. The humiliation that had once burned hot had cooled into something heavier, quieter, stronger, liberation. The applause softened into silence again, but the message lingered, vibrating in the air. The Mercers had been judged, not by me, but by everyone who had once feared them. I turned slowly, my heels clicking against the polished floor. My eyes swept over the room one final time. Faces I had worked with for 19 years met mine with respect, even gratitude. And with that, I turned toward the glass doors. The auditorium had fallen into a stunned, uneasy silence. Applause had died down, laughter had faded, and all that remained was the echo of what had just unfolded. I turned toward the glass doors, heels tapping softly against the polished floor. No one tried to stop me. No one dared. Instead, a few employees gave small nods as I passed, quiet gestures of respect that said more than words ever could. Some even straightened in their seats, as if acknowledging what they had always known but never spoken, that the lifeline of Stratacore had never been a mercer. It had been me. My steps were steady, deliberate, carrying the weight of 19 years behind them. Then Richard's voice cracked the silence, ragged and desperate. "You'll ruin us!" I paused mid-step, hand brushing against the cool glass of the door. Slowly, I turned my head back, my eyes meeting his. His face was flushed with anger and fear, his empire unraveling in real time. "No," I said evenly, my voice calm and unshakable. "Your son did." The words hung in the air like a final verdict. Brandon flinched, his fists still clenched, his arrogance stripped bare. But here was the truth, the one no one in that room yet realized. The system wasn't gone. It hadn't self-destructed or vanished. Every file, every contract, every dollar of value still existed, preserved and intact. The difference was ownership. Years earlier, long before I ever suspected betrayal, I had secured something the Mercers never noticed: legal guardianship. I had registered the intellectual property, the code, and the architecture of the bloodline system under an LLC in my name. Quiet, meticulous, invisible. And as of this moment, when Brandon severed me publicly, the rights fully reverted. The empire they thought they controlled no longer belonged to them. It belonged to me. I pushed open the doors, stepping into the city air. Cool wind rushed against my face, carrying with it the sound of distant traffic and the hum of a world that kept moving, indifferent to the collapse behind me. For 19 years, I had been invisible, humiliated, overlooked, stripped of credit. But as I inhaled the sharp night air, a slow smile spread across my lips. I was no longer a discarded employee. I was the owner, the architect, the sole guardian of the data lifeline they had once taken for granted. I walked down the steps and into the streetlights, each stride lighter than the last. My humiliation had transformed into liberation. Their empire had collapsed, but I was free, and for the first time in 19 years, the system was mine alone. If this story struck a chord with you, if you've ever felt invisible, undervalued, or underestimated, let it remind you, sometimes, walking away is the most powerful move you can make. Share your thoughts in the comments, hit like if this resonated, and subscribe for more stories that turn injustice into unforgettable justice.